Today I'm talking with Chip Freed. Chip is the lead pastor at Garfield Memorial Church in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, this is truly a multi-ethnic church with many people that have all kinds of different backgrounds and beliefs. However, the one thing they have in common is they love Jesus, they love each other, and they set aside their differences. Now, Chip leads this church. He's doing an amazing job. And I'm really excited for you to hear how Chip is leading in this very difficult season of multi-ethnic church. Well, hey, Chip, thanks for joining us today. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Hey, it's great to meet you for the first time in person, and really love what Missional Marketing is doing, man.
Yeah, well, we love what you're doing. We have heard some great things, and today I'd like to talk about some topics that are kind of hard. They're certainly difficult, but a lot of churches are, getting into this space, and finally maybe, but getting into this space. So we got this election coming up here in November, and it's probably as polarizing as it's maybe ever been, but maybe not. But certainly feels that way, especially when you think about all the racial issues we have in our country. So how have you managed that? How have you talked to your congregation about that? Because you are truly a multi-diverse church.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just a little about us in Cleveland, Ohio, too. It's kind of unique in the sense that Cleveland always makes the top 10 list of most segregated cities in America. So we were 7 this year. We've been as high as 3, I think, 3 years ago. So for us, it's very important for us to model as a church to not just reflect the community, but more importantly, reflect the kingdom. We believe Jesus was really serious when he said, "Thy kingdom come on earth," right? And so we talk about this. We're partners with the Mosaics Global Network. We're teaching church in that. And a working definition of the multi-ethnic church is that we say we will ourselves to walk, work, and worship together as one for the sake of a credible witness of God's love for all people, not just some people.
Yeah.
So that word will, you know what I mean, James? That's an active word. And so I think willing ourselves to try to be this kind of witness in a polarized time, it's kind of for such a time as this. But what folks don't realize, they say, oh, well, look at Garfield, and they don't realize how hard it is. I mean, within our body, just to even stay together, when the world is literally trying to pull us apart. And the, diversity of political opinion is there. We don't go after people or parties. I don't endorse that, and we don't talk about it. But, we'll go after racism, we'll go after sexism, we'll go after things that hurt and injure people and discriminate against people. And we try to stay in that lane, but we really have to continually call our folks to the mission of being this kind of witness. In other words, I always say there's no chance of Garfield Memorial becoming a preference-driven church, because people got to leave their preferences to be in a church where we have 2 rules at our church, Jason, that this may tell you. We can talk more specifically about the election, but it gives you kind of the fiber of who we are. We say to be part of our church, 1, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. That's 1. Although when I read my scriptures, I don't find anything where Jesus called us to like this quote unquote comfortable life.
Right. I was just going to say that. Yeah.
But we just say you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And number 2, we say you're going to like 70% of what happens here. And if you can live in that, you're cool, you're game. Because when you're in your 30%, understand somebody else is in their 70%. So there's something about this church that I really admire, and I don't just say that from the lead pastor chair, but I see folks of every tribe, culture, nation, the Revelation 7-9 church, and I see folks who are really working at their walk with Christ. I mean, a lot of places you go, and we do some fun stuff. Don't get me wrong, people love it, enjoy it. A lot of places people go because they want to feel totally comfortable, and I get this, and I love this preaching, I love this music, love the kids ministry. Yeah. I think we put a lot of time in that. But I see folks really stretching, just stretching. Like, we can't be everything. Nobody can do that. But people are really trying. And I really, really admire that. I think that's a depth in their spiritual walk.
Yeah, well, to your point, Jesus never said this is going to be easy. And why would you want it to be easy? It's It's hard. And for you to have a truly growing diverse church, well, it speaks volumes to your leadership in painting that picture. That I love that concept. Hey, if there's no perfect church ever, right? Jesus is perfect. We're not. So therefore we're not going to have a perfect church at all. But you're leading people to recognize that it's okay. You have to be accepting and focus first on Jesus and focus on love, and the rest of it kind of takes care of itself. And I'm sure is there a time where this kind of like it clicked going, we really need to be focused on that? Like, is that something that?
Well, I got to do a little personal confession. Okay. It's I guess in my DNA. I think every pastor needs to dig down deep. What are their core callings, right? Like I was never called to go visit people at the hospital or lead a trustee meeting, but you learn to do those things.
Yeah.
My core calling was first and foremost to preach the gospel. That was clear, very young. And secondly, there was dealing with the fragmentation of community. Like I was raised in a house with a mother that was amazing. Like she had to have the talk with me about racism, what racism was. Because I played Division I college basketball, so I was a basketball-holic. And the first African American moved into our school system in the 7th grade. So I would have been, I'm going to date myself, 1976. And, we became buds because we were teammates. And I went to the swim club, took him as a guest, and they came out and bleached the pool, and I rode our bikes back home, and my mom had to have the talk with me. And, there's a passage where it says, Jesus looked at the crowd and he had great compassion on them. And you probably know this as a biblical scholar, that had compassion is that word in the Greek that comes from like splagna, which is like his intestines twisted. And when my mom had that talk with me, something inside me twisted, and I almost got sick to my stomach. And I just felt this calling, So I went down the path of learning beyond my own culture. I had a degree in African American Studies, a minor at Colgate with Manning Marable, who was Cornell West professor. So I went to Princeton. I was a graduate assistant for Cornell. So kind of immersed in this whole race crisis. Met my wife. We've been married over 3 decades. She happens to be African American. So we got together when only 10% of America was in favor of interracial marriage. And we heard a lot of preachers preaching against that. And we lived through that whole needle. So we've tried to be, just bridge builders. We don't go in with this as a cause. But I've had the privilege to only serve 2 churches in my life. One was the oldest historical African American church in Lorain County that had dwindled down to 32 people. And by the time we left there, they were running 400 in worship and probably 65-35. And then here at Garfield was more of a upper middle class, all white church that transitioned now to about 1,300 active folks, 647 adult baptisms the last 10 years. I love that number.
That's awesome.
But no one ethnic group more than 52%. And I don't know. I think my wife and I probably were carriers of that, just as who we are in our DNA. But I always share with folks, this really grows out of healthy evangelistic DNA. When Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all," ethne, that's the word for people groups, ethne in the Greek. I think we translate that into go and make some, and fish in certain waters. And what's your target audience, right? Like at Mosaic, we challenge Mark DeMoz and I, and we say, who's your target audience was never a biblical question. We made it this question. It's go out and reach, every people, nation, tribe, and language. And the Revelation 7:9 church. I talk a lot at Garfield, like we know where we're going. If you ever build something, like I'm a terrible builder. My oldest daughter, she's an architect, so she's the builder. But even when we're putting something together, what do? You have to look at the box top, right? Like, how does this thing go together? Yeah. Forget the instructions. And I feel like in Revelation 7:9, God gave us the box top. Like we know the trajectory of the church. So are we just sitting back now saying, well, God will figure that out someday? When he says, no, my kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, what you bind on earth will be bound in. There's just, we're to be the now and not yet. So yeah, getting a group of folk that are committed to that in their walk with Christ. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah.
But you're right, in an election year, it's also really, really challenging.
Yeah, well, so to your point, you're not going to wander into becoming a multi-ethnic church. That's not going to happen, right? It just won't happen. So you guys have addressed that, and you are that, like I think you said 52%. You're just a mixed background, mixed race. What advice do you give to churches that they don't have that statistic, that are going, probably need to think about this, and we need to pray about this and be led by God. But what would you say practically? This is what you have to do.
Yeah. So first off, generate a holy discontent. I don't think there's enough of that in our churches. We look around and we see like we're all this culture. We're all Republican. We're all Democrat. We're all college educated. We're birds of a feather flock together. And what we try to do with Mosaic is go in and just kind of generate a little holy discontent about that. The truth, and to not say just this isn't simply because of the changing demographic of America, which that's not going anywhere, right? The number one contributor to the fact that we'll be a non-Anglo majority nation by about 2043, everybody thinks it's immigration or something. It's birth rate, right? That's what's doing it. I contributed to that. It's not going anywhere. And so obviously to be relevant in our culture, we talk about this, but we don't do it for that reason. We do it because really this is biblically mandated. People don't think about this, but every single church in the book of Acts is a multi-ethnic church. And so, we feel it's envisioned by Christ in John 17. It's described by Luke in the book of Acts, and it's prescribed by Paul. Here's a little truth bomb for folks that are out there. It dawned on me, Paul had a specific calling, and it was Gentile inclusion, right? Which was an ethnic difference between Jew and Gentile. And he, a former Pharisee, was called to Gentile inclusion. In fact, in Romans 16:25, he talked about, I came to share with you my gospel and the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, can you imagine, Jason, I stand up in your church and I say, hey, Jason brought me today, and Chip's here. I'm here to preach my gospel. Like, you've got to throw me out. But Paul had like the big G gospel, Mark DeMoss likes to say, and then the little G gospel, and his little G gospel was Gentile inclusion. And if you read the book of Acts, that's what got Paul killed. He was not killed for preaching Jesus. He was killed for Gentile inclusion. Read Acts 22:22. Easy one to remember. 22:22. He's giving his defense before the Jews, and he's sharing everything about the good news of Christ and what's happened. But then in 22:21, he says, and God has called me to reach the Gentiles. And at Acts 22:22 said, up to this point, they listened to him. But when he said that, they said, this fellow should not be on the earth, and he must die. So this is, I guess, creating that holy discontent, understand it's biblically mandated, and then actually take some intentional steps. Like, there's a whole laundry list of what some of those can be.
Yeah.
But taking some intentionality. I got into a Twitter fight, which I should know better. And it happened to be a pastor of my own tribe. I didn't know it, with a leader that I spoke with at Exponential. So I felt pretty ashamed of myself. But he put something out there in this podcast that said, hey, if your aim is diversity, all you'll get is political correctness. But if your aim is Jesus, you'll get diversity. So I hit him up and I said, hey, bro, how's that been working out for us for 200 years? So, 87% of churches in America are by definition segregated along ethnic lines. So I guess we never made it about Jesus. So didn't get me a Christmas card, but I think that's ridiculous. We're intentional about worship. We're intentional about discipleship. We're intentional about offering excellence. And, Paul was intentional in his. So to be intentional about this is important, not just if God wanted it to happen, it would happen. Why only when we come to this issue do I start hearing things like that? It's not like, well, if God wanted worship to happen, it just happens. So let's hope a worship leader shows up or somebody has a prepared message. We don't do anything like that. So taking some intentionality, and I can dig down deeper what that is, but those would be the opening statements I'd say to some folks.
Yeah, I had a podcast with a African American leader in a church in Kansas City, and he had some really great advice. He said, if you really want to work on building a diverse church, he goes, you got to go meet people that are not like you, and you got to
Yeah.
develop relationships. And he started by going to another church, and this is a white church, another church, and his is a black church, and they've swapped pulpits. They've
I know who
focused
you're
on
talking about. I mean,
yeah.
we all know each other in this movement. But it's absolutely right. Like we say, it's hard to lead a multi-ethnic church if you don't lead a multi-ethnic life.
Yeah.
If you just want your Sunday morning to be that way, but your Fridays and Saturdays never are. And that gets into who are you reading, who you're mentoring, who's mentoring you.
Yeah.
And luckily in our society, that's becoming less and less difficult to do. Although, as you said, this election year, there's a lot of play on racial anxiety, and it's forcing people back into pockets that, to me, is satanic. We battle not against flesh and blood. Pretty obviously, these are acts of the enemy. Divide and conquer is pretty clear.
Yeah.
And but I think Matthew 16, Jesus said we're to be God's wrecking crew against the gates of hell. So we got to fight back against that offensively. That's what we're trying to do. We don't do it perfect at all, but that's what we're trying to do.
But you guys, it seems like you guys are you're speaking up about it. You're actually going there where a lot of pastors, when they're in the pulpit, they just try to avoid that and hope it goes away, or hope it doesn't become an issue.
Yeah, we own it. We really do. And right now, in fact, right through the election, we've been in a teaching series. I told our folks, we are not going to let this go until after the election. We got something planned for the holidays, but it's all on reconciliation. The whole theme of reconciliation. God was in Christ, reconciling the world unto himself. And what Paul said, God has given us this ministry of reconciliation. Now, there's a really sappy reconciliation that's preached out there in the church, and I don't like it. And it was like, well, let's just go stand in a big arena, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya. That's not the work of reconciliation. Reconciliation is hard, difficult work. And we've been talking about that leading up to this and saying this is what we're called to. I was just praying today, Jason, and talk about the election. I knew I was going to have the privilege to talk to you. And I was stuck in 1 John 3:1, where it says this love that the Father has lavished on us. I started digging back because I'm old enough to remember the King James, right? Like that was my devotional Bible. And the King James said, what manner of love is this, right, that God has lavished on us? When I dug into the Greek text, and just did this today, something I had never realized. Actually, what John was quoting was a very well-known idiom in that day and age. And the literal translation said, what country is love like this come from? Like that was and I thought, my gosh, in the midst of an election, like there is a love that comes out that it is not a political party. It is not a conservative liberal thing. It shatters the borders, the parties, the boundaries of this world as we know. And if we can dig our nose back in that, what country did a love like this come from? And does that compel me, right? That Paul says in 2 Corinthians, when he talks about the ministry of reconciliation, he said, this love of Christ compels me. It compels me. My wife and I just were talking yesterday and having our own personal event. And, as an African-American woman, there's been some really, really painful things for her. We almost lost our middle son to a profiling incident in 2010 with two of his African-American college teammates. So this stuff hits so close to home. And we were talking, there was things that got her angry, got me angry. But then we held hands and said, but this Jesus thing, man, we got to stay in this work of reconciliation, right? Like we can't leave it. And that's that love, that other country love that he's lavished on us. Man, it compels us into this work. And it's a good thing it does, because otherwise we'd all quit and give up, because it's hard.
Yeah.
This is not in the handbook they give you how to plant a new church. It's not one of the 69 steps, trust me.
Oh my. Yeah. It's got to be, it's one of those battles that's it's going to be ongoing for a long, long time. And
it has been. It has been. It's not new. it has been. This happened to be, Jim Wallis talks about this as America's original sin. I don't think he's wrong. Dr. King said racism is as indigenous to America as pine trees. So, but that was Jew and Gentile. If you read Jew and Gentiles become so tame to us. But when Paul says that Jesus has torn down the wall of hostility between us, that word hostility was active hatred. It was historical enmity. And of course, dating back to Cain and Abel, our needs to tribalize and, from our own sinfulness, Satan has exploited that through the years. But this is, to me, so I got something I'm actually putting in a book. I shouldn't put out there. Somebody will steal it from me. But, we always talk about the Adam and Eve story and, the foundational story of, original sin, which I get, and Cain and Abel illustrated there. And Christ on the cross, redeeming us from that, right? That brokenness from God. Get it? That's the foundational atonement, anthem. I'm in, sold. I gave my life to Christ. I think there was a second fall, and it was a corporate fall, and it happened at the Tower of Babel. That led us now. Now it's not me. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. I heard Desmond Tutu said the serpent had nobody else to blame. Like, we're always blame shifting. But at the corporate fall, let us build for ourselves. Let us make a name for ourselves. And God broke that, right? Like, broke that idea apart. But I never thought about that. Just as the cross was the solution to the individual sin, the church was supposed to be the solution to the corporate sin. And Pentecost itself was a healing event from the Tower of Babel. Yeah. Now everybody spoke in their own language, but all heard the message of the good news of Christ. So I think we've undersold the church in some ways. I mean, we're a mess. We know that. It's what proves God. How could you run an organization like this for 2,000 years and still be here? Yeah. But I think that Jesus' idea for this thing he called his bride, his church, was to deal with this very issue, the brokenness, the fragmentation and brokenness of what is ultimately restored in Revelation 7:9. So it's like Paul said, I feel like I'm stuck with it. Like, he's lavished his love of this other country love on me. He's reconciled me to the cross, and to I have to be in this work of reconciliation with my brothers and sisters. So his love compels me.
Well, there's another, thanks for sharing that. There's another area you guys are, you're unique in, and that is you guys have, you have a traditional and a modern worship service, right?
Yeah.
So how did that happen? I mean,
Wow. Well, we are in a mainline church. A lot of people call us an anomaly, but we're part of the United Methodist Church. I love the Methodist heritage. I love the missional aspect that the Methodist movement has. I love that the Methodist movement was multi-ethnic at its inception in America. Now, sin broke that, but there's a lot of other junk that comes with denominational life that none of us love. They turn into clubs instead of movements. Yeah. But in the mainline church, there's usually a traditional service, if you will. But again, that's a culturally loaded term, because traditional worship is white Eurocentric worship, right? But there's that, and we have that, and then we have our mosaic services, which are more modern. But the beauty is the same message, the same teaching. What did Andy Stanley say? The message never changes, but the methods always do. Yep. So, we honor folks worship in different ways. Folks learn in different ways. Folks experience God in different ways. And we honor that in our space, that it's not just, we want your color, not your culture, right? It's like, we have folks who are charismatic, we have folks who are more cerebral. You get me going on my preaching. Our foundational sermon for Garfield is Acts 16, where, Luke gives us these case studies. Lydia, the little slave girl, the Roman jailer, those were the first three conversions, and we knew there were more. So why does Luke tell us those three? They're so different. They're ethnically different. They're sociologically different. Their learner style different, right? Lydia went to a little small group. They sat down, and she's thinking, right? She's having tea. The little slave girl, man, she's at a Pentecostal revival. She needs a power encounter on her heart. And the Roman jailer, man, he's drinking beer at the VFW. He doesn't care what you and I talk about. But somehow the gospel broke through in each individual. So we try to be that community where Lydia, the little slave girl, the Roman jail, all of them can come in. They can connect with God in their own unique way, but journey to the same water of reconciliation. Can you imagine being in Lydia's house and those three were sitting around the table? I mean, like, where do those, and that's why I preach, where do those people ever get together in the world?
Yeah.
Right? Here's Lydia. She's a fashion CEO. She's eating at Ruth Chris every night. She's wealthy. Here's a little slave girl. She's sex trafficked under East Ninth Bridge in Cleveland, hoping her pimp brings her a cheeseburger. And here's this ex-GI guy over with his buds, like I said, the VFW. Where in the world do those three people get together in the real world? Never. In the church. Christ's reconciling movement. There's a table for each of them. And I'm going to tell you, when you actually feast at that table, it's hard work, but boy, is it rich. So that's, I don't know if I answered that, but so I think that's even the uniqueness of our worship offering. I laugh when I'm out preaching at Exponential or the Mosaic Round Table, and they're like, I'm the only dude that has one of those worship experiences. But I think it's part of our diversity. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, you know, because you have different styles of worship, but yet you've still been able to gather one church in a sense, right? One body that looks completely different than most churches out there. And you're doing that, and you're serving, and you're growing, and you're discipling in different spaces. And that's hard to do, isn't it?
It's very hard to do, but it's hard to do, but it's sacred. And here's another thing I say to pastors. You know, when my wife and I got together, as I said, 10% of America was in favor of interracial marriage. Yeah. We had so many people in our ears telling us why it wouldn't work. What did they know? You know, here we are 32 years later. I have my best friend, my ministry partner. God ordained this couple to just be who we were. I say the same thing about this hard church work. What do they know when they say it can't be done? So work at it. Here's last sermon, I promise. You get me fired up on this, Jason. You can already tell. But John 17, Jesus said, you know, he prayed for us, you know, those who are yet to come because of this witness. So, you know, when preachers say on the last night of Jesus' life, he had you on his mind, that's real. Like he prayed, he prayed for himself, he prayed for his disciples, then he prayed for us. And he said one prayer, you know this, that they might be completely one. And then he said this, so that the world will know that you sent me. Like I can't guarantee they'll do it. It's a henna clause. But if they do it, the world will know. And that's why I tell Garfield, I said, folks, you got to be a so that church. Yeah. You got to be, you know, that, you know, people do, you know, we're known in Cleveland. I mean, you know, when Tamir Rice was shot, I was one of the first pastors that the city leaders called. And I was like, I don't even know somebody, but like, yeah, but when we speak to you, we speak to everybody. Right? Like we know there's all the pieces of the pie are there. And I think when that rumor gets out, even people go like, I don't know if I know what they believe, but wow, there's something different. You know, what manner of love is this, right? I'm back to that verse. What country of love is this thing from? That conservatives, liberals, Republicans, Democrats, black, white, people of different orientations, people trying to figure out how can they be in this place? There's got to be something beyond, you know, this world. I mean, that's me preaching it, but right. We sense that. We get people come to our church that said they'd never be caught dead in church. You know, wow. It's fun to give up. It's fun to get up on Sunday and I sit there and say, look, I know, again, this is pre-pandemic, but even still now online. But when we were all in physical space or something, in addition online, I say things like, hey, I know some of you are here because you lost a bet or because you're trying to get that second date, but that's okay, you know. And I had a brother come up to me, white brother, all cut, built. He's like, I don't like church, don't like Christians, didn't like pastors, don't like you, but I'm trying to get that second date. And I'm looking like, who you dating? He's like, her. I said, well, you better get to know Jesus, bro. You know. But again, that folks feel like, because there's that kind of diversity. And there's all diversity, but I don't know if you're conservative or liberal, but I know if you're maybe, you know, Puerto Rican or Chinese or Anglo, and they see that and they go, wow, maybe there's a space for me. And it just like they feel like there's an opportunity to get into a place like that where it won't be so conspicuous, you know. I just remember the interracial couple, my wife and I was away from the Lord. I was running my own business. My wife is the one that brought me back to Christ. And we knew we had to get into a church, but where were we going to go as an interracial couple in like mid 1985, right? Like, where were we going to go? So she was from Canton, I was from Youngstown, and we started visiting churches. And you know, we go to a white church, they talk about us. We go to a black church, they talk about us. I told my wife, I said, why don't we go to the Korean church? And she said to me, she said, Chip, that's a Korean speaking church. I said, yeah, honey, but when we go there and they talk about us, we won't know what they're saying. and it's so funny. Like, we were in that position of being the outsiders and finding we had a tough time getting into church because they were their own folks and they were their own club. And I guess it's in both of our hearts that we want to make sure we're not stumbling anybody, that they can wander into Garfield. And I got an email from somebody worshiping with us online and said they were Hindu family. And they're like, you know, we really love what you're doing, and we like the things that we're doing to engage the community. And they're like, can we be involved, you know? And I told them, hey, you know, we're unashamedly a Christian church. I hope you're listening to this gospel of Jesus. I want you to do it. No, we built this church for you. You can belong before you believe. You can come on in. I just want folks to feel it's a safe place to church.
Yeah.
Right?
Feel at home, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and feel safe. I mean, I always laugh in some ways, the Pharisees that, you know, there was so much wrong with that story, as you know, when they ripped the woman caught in the act of adultery. Of course, where's the man, and was it a setup, and blah, blah, blah. But these Pharisees dragged that poor woman in a moment of humiliation and threw her at the feet of Jesus, which was the safest place she could ever be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they didn't know it. And that's kind of, to me, is what if the church were that? Just the feet of Jesus, where folks could come in, and it's literally the safest place they could ever be.
Yeah.
That's what we try to do.
Well, and that's what we would hope every local church is like, truly, and not be judgmental. The problem is people in the church are the ones that give that weird look or say something, and it's like, come on. Yeah. So,
because they're anyhow. Go ahead.
What does it look like for you, for your church? You know, as you look to, you know, past this election, so get past November, we're still in this pandemic, and you think about 2020 has been quite the year, and you look at 2021. Where are you? What are you praying for? Where are you hoping you go? What does that look like?
Yeah, man, I tell you, I was just it's funny, I was in an interview with somebody from our denomination earlier today, and anybody that answers that question like they know, don't trust them.
Yeah.
Because I really feel like, and this excites me, and it scares me to my core. This is Lewis and Clark time. I mean, there's no maps. We're making the map. And I feel like it bugs me, because I feel like with 30 years experience, I feel like, wow, you know, like with Mosaic, we talk about our friend Mark DeMoss and others, like we gained all this knowledge, and like none of that's going to help me a bit in the next decade. Like I got to relearn everything.
Yeah.
And I think to be in that spirit of really discovery, but knowing that God is ahead of us, and we're just joining with Him in this kind of new reality. Because the churches that are going to fail are the people who think, well, this is going to be over at some point and everything's back to normal. That's a prescription for failure. Now, some things will be normal, and there'll be lives where there'll be other things, but it's never going to be the same. These are transitional moments, and so if we can live in that, it's great. And again, Garfield has felt we have a Vision 2020 team. This was planned way before the pandemic, and they're looking out beyond me. You know, I mean, the next 10 years is probably going to be the transition of senior leadership at Garfield.
Yeah.
And they have felt, and that's why we're preaching it, they have felt that for whatever reason, this ministry of reconciliation is what God wants us to have. So I have been trying to up the ante even more with our membership. You know, from fan to followers. That wasn't my words. I forget the brother that wrote that book. But, you know, that we got to go deeper. So I've told them, if we have a Gideon revival that we went from 200 to 1,300 and God takes us back to 200, I'm like okay with that right now. But I want to be the 200 with their hair on fire about this kind of mission in this brave new world. And so, it's a real adventure for me right now. But this ministry of reconciliation, 2 Corinthians 5, we're going to stay in that lane, and we're just going to try to be that kind of light and challenge and love in action, scattered, right? I've told our staff in our church, I used to preach Acts 2. I used to love Acts 2. I used to go to Acts 2 conferences. I can't stand Acts 2 anymore. I used to love it. I wanted to be those folks. And then one day that God hit me upside the head, and like Jesus told them folks to go, and they stayed. And they were doing these wonderful things, but they were doing it for each other. Wow. And it wasn't until Acts 8, when the persecutions came and they were scattered, that they went from being ministry consumers to ministry providers. So Garfield Church, North Point Church, Willow Creek Church, Saddleback, name them all. We've been scattered, which may put us right where God wanted us in the first place. That not just coming to a place to be ministry consumers, but as I say, Acts 8, ministry providers, proclaiming the word wherever we go. So we're emphasizing church at home right now. I've been telling our members, like, we're Home Depot right now. You can do it. We can help. You used to come for us to do it. No, now you do it. You disciple your kids. You witness on your jobs. You serve the poor, and we'll help you. We'll be your consultant, right? We'll be like our podcast time, And I can't wait to see what God does this next decade. I really can't. I think it's going to be, 1,000 years from now, folks will be writing about this decade.
Probably, yeah, because I think that churches I talk to a lot of churches, and all of them are kind of trying to figure out, scratching their head, redefining what does church look like. We know what the mission of the church is. We're not saying that's going away, but how you do that certainly is.
And what are the metrics, right?
And what are the metrics? How do you measure that? How, can you truly disciple somebody online? Is it? And I was using myself as an example because I got 2 teenage boys, and so we've been taking the opportunity to sit in our family room after we watch the message and actually have a conversation.
Right.
And I got 2 teenage boys. I want to pour into them. I want them to learn to own their faith.
Yep.
Not just borrow their faith because we said, here's, you're going to be, that's not what I want for my boys. But I would not have that conversation if, we're driving to church and then we're talking with people afterwards, and then we get in the car and we probably go our separate ways because we're all doing different things. We would never have that intimate time together.
Yeah.
This has afforded us that opportunity.
Yep. You're illustrating exactly what we're trying to preach, and teach with our folks right now. And that's claiming something, this is probably off topic, but I was in a different podcast and somebody was bemoaning, and I hate to be, we're all thin right now, so we pop off too easy. But he was bemoaning, well, the government, they're trying to shut us down and they won't let us gather in our building, and just kept going on. I said, would you stop whining? I said, you realize in the last 6 months, the gospel has been preached to more people in America than it had in the past 6 years.
Yeah.
There are more people right now looking online and engaging and hearing this message than ever. I heard Craig Greshow at Life Church say something about, I think they, as huge as they are, they, don't quote me on this, but something around like the average, like 20,000 salvations a weekend across the whole span of the country. The first weekend after the pandemic, they had 150,000 conversions.
Yeah.
People are, this is an opportune time. It's scary. It's uncomfortable. I didn't wish it. Like Esther didn't wish that she was born for such a time as this.
Right.
But, Jason, you and I, for such a time as this. And we're trying to figure out, and as you say, the mission doesn't change. But, we've got to have some new wineskins and
That's right.
and look for these opportunities. Like we started something like Garfield. We just started last month. We have after parties now. So we do our services. We do one in the parking lot live. We've got a few people coming in live in service with social distance and all that. we have our broadcast. We rebroadcast at various times. So throughout the morning, there's maybe 5, 6 opportunities to be part of worship. And at 1 o'clock, we say, hey, DVR the Browns and come on in, and we theme them, we tailgate, we come in and after party, and let's chomp into the message. And our pastors go in breakout rooms, and who would have thought such a thing?
Yeah.
But it's great, and we're like saying now, do this with your family. And so I don't know. Like I say, I'm energized and I'm in trepidation. But I think that's what Paul said. We work out our salvation in fear and trembling. Trembling can be a good thing.
Yes, it can.
It's exciting. But so that's kind of where we're at. And anybody that tells you they're an expert, don't believe them. But people that are realizing, they're hopping in the canoe with Sacagawea and let's go figure it out. That's the spirit. That's the spirit I'm calling on right now.
Yeah, knowing that God's got a plan for it. So keeping your mind open, your eyes open, and acting well, and recognizing what a gift, what an opportunity, instead of going, man, we're getting the short end of the stick here. No, you're not.
It's weird. I was with some pastors this week, and we were realizing too, maybe God, the wheat in the shaft thing. I mean, maybe God's just doing some weaning out. Like we had settled for so little and called it church. I had a pastor tell me that somebody called him and in the church and said, okay, I want one answer and one answer only. And how you say it, you can only say one word is going to determine where kind of the top families stay or leave the church. And she said, do Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter? Like he had to answer in one word. And however he answered, they were gone. And I said, I hope they're gone. And they are. Yeah. And I just said, it hurt when people, but it's like maybe God's just saying, I got to shake that out. I got to get back to the folks really with their hair on fire for what this gospel really is, to go out and preach the love of Christ. And maybe this is the scattering of Acts 8. And I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's why I say, when you say what's next, I felt like I'd asked our folks at our church an awful lot to let them lay aside personal preferences, past experiences, politics, and focus. But there's even a next level of this being ministry providers that I'm gonna work real hard with them on and understand, saying, look, hey, here I'm your lead pastor. I'm not sure I'm up to it. I get it, but nonetheless, this is the ministry that His love, other country love, compels us. Yeah. I laugh every time I say that. I think remember the Exorcist movie? I'm so old. And in the Exorcist, the Lord Jesus Christ compels you. It was like a negative thing. The opposite of that is, man, the love of Jesus Christ compels us. It just projects us out into the world. And I'm hoping that's what's happening.
Yeah. Well, your message of reconciliation and just staying on that theme, so timely with anything that's going on, right? And we have some big issues in our country right now, and it doesn't seem like it's going to go away anytime soon. So that's if churches can take anything away, be like, focus on that, make that a core.
Yeah, and let's do that together.
Yep.
I always say I'm not running for anything, and my allegiance is to another kingdom. That doesn't mean that I don't care about what happens here. It doesn't mean we don't confront injustice. It doesn't mean we don't be good citizens, all those things. Not at all. But, ultimately, am I living in the ethics of the true kingdom for Jesus Christ? I tell my folks, here's the good news. 3 billion years from now in eternity, we won't even remember what a president was.
Nope.
So let's be that colony from heaven that Paul talks about. And be in the world, not of the world. I mean, fight injustice. I'm not preaching the opiate of the people, but let's remember, where our ultimate home is.
Yeah.
And work toward that. Toward that. But it's hard work. But it should be. Jesus didn't. I remember Martin Luther King Jr. once said, in one of his great sermons, he said, when did the Great Commission become, lo, I send you into the world to keep your blood pressure down and have a well-adjusted personality. It said, no, we're called to this hard work. And that's a credible witness for the hard work. But anyhow.
Yeah. Well, Chip, thank you for your insight.
Hey, bro, it's really good meeting you in person.
Yeah, likewise. So I appreciate you, appreciate what you're doing for his kingdom, and keep up the good work.
And do no other.
All right. Take care.
Gold and silver have I none. What I have, I gave to you, my brother.
All right. We'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Thank you, sir. See you.
Bye. Well, Chip, we should all be inspired to lead like this, generating a holy discontent that has us focusing on being a multi-ethnic church. It's mandated in the Bible. You spoke into this. This work of reconciliation is not easy. A takeaway for you, church, might be to think about your church and where you're headed. Are you focused on a biblical mandate that all people should learn and get to know Jesus? Is that what you're doing? Now, if you want to learn more, check out Chip at Garfield Memorial Church, right? Or go to the Mosaic Network. That's an organization that works with churches and helps them become multi-ethnic. And so I encourage you to do that. Until next time, God bless and take care.